Hey. Podcast intro music. Reformed thinking fades under.
Welcome to Reformed Thinking, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. This is where we dig into a pile of information, really try and get to the core of what counts.
Yeah. Our goal is to give you that shortcut, help you get genuinely informed without drowning in data.
We want to uncover those surprising bits, make sense of things that might seem pretty complex at first glance.
Exactly. Aiming for those aha moments, those key insights that stick with you.
So today we're doing a deep dive into, well, a really remarkable book of the Bible, the Epistle to the Philippians. We've got a stack of notes, articles, research here, all shedding light on its content, its history, who wrote it, where from. It's fascinating stuff.
And our aim today is to really boil down the central message, the background of this letter.
Yeah, show you why it still speaks so powerfully today, why it's so relevant for us.
Especially through that lens of God's absolute sovereignty, his control, particularly when life gets really, really tough.
Okay, so let's start right at the heart of Philippians. There's this very specific kind of joy mentioned.
Right.
It's so central, so foundational, that the letter often gets called the Epistle of Joy.
And that's not just a casual nickname. The sources point out the actual Greek word for joy, kara, and the verb form cheirein.
To rejoice.
Yeah, to rejoice. They appear something like, 16 times? More than a dozen anyway, across his 4 short chapters.
That kind of repetition isn't accidental, is it? It really flags it as the main theme.
Absolutely. It's deliberate. And what's really striking, I think, is how the text draws this sharp distinction between, let's say, worldly happiness and biblical joy.
Okay, explain that difference.
Well, happiness, the kind most of us maybe chase after day to day, the sources describe it as fleeting. It's an emotion.
Right, it comes and goes.
Exactly. Often tied to pleasure or getting what you want, maybe accumulating stuff. And it really depends on external circumstances, doesn't it?
Totally. If things are going your way, you feel happy, job's good, relationship's good.
Money's okay, yeah. But the moment those externals shift, you lose the job, the relationship hits a rough patch, finances get tight, maybe even conflict within a group you care about.
That happiness just vanishes. Poof.
Right. And you feel like you're being controlled by your circumstances instead of, having any stability.
Yeah.
And chasing that feeling, that conditional state, can lead to this really cynical outlook. Like the preacher in Ecclesiastes, vanity of vanities, all is vanity.
Just emptiness because it doesn't last.
It's built on sand.
Yeah.
But biblical joy, now that's presented as something fundamentally different.
Okay, how so?
It's not primarily an emotion that swings with your situation. It's described more as a settled conviction, a deep confidence.
A conviction about what?
About God's sovereign control. The belief that God is orchestrating all events, even the difficult ones, for the good of his people and ultimately for his own glory.
So it's not about feeling good because things are good.
Not primarily, no. It's an internal posture, a heart attitude rooted in who God is and what he's doing. It's this confidence that he's always active, always working his purposes out.
Even when everything around you seems chaotic or painful.
Precisely. Even when circumstances seem to completely contradict any idea of well-being, it doesn't deny the reality of pain, but it looks beyond it to God's overarching plan.
And this kind of joy, it's not just for spiritual giants.
No, the text makes it clear it's available to all believers who walk in obedience to God. In fact, it's presented as a command.
A command like, be joyful.
Yes, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. That phrase, or similar commands to rejoice, appear over and over in Philippians. It's not a suggestion, it's an instruction.
Wow. So it's a posture God calls his people to adopt.
It is, and it stems directly from understanding his absolute control, his sovereignty. He's not just observing, he's actively governing every detail. That's the anchor for this kind of deep, abiding joy.
So what does that mean practically for us listening today?
It means this joy isn't hostage to fortune. It doesn't depend on having a good day or favorable circumstances.
It's internal, rooted in God's character and his constant work.
Yes, his ultimate purpose, which often unfolds in ways we don't see immediately. You're not chasing a feeling based on happenings. You're resting in a conviction based on God's faithfulness.
And we're going to see this lived out, aren't we? In the life of Paul, the author.
Absolutely. And also in the lives of the Philippian Christians he was writing to.
They both faced incredible hardship, yet joy is the theme that just permeates this letter. It's a paradox.
It is. How could joy be the dominant note when life was objectively terrible? That's the question we need to unpack.
Okay, let's shift focus then to the author himself, the Apostle Paul. The sources are pretty clear. His authorship isn't really debated.
No, not seriously. Philippians 1.1 says, Paul and Timothy, servants of Christ Jesus. So he names himself right at the start.
And the internal evidence.
It's overwhelming. One scholar puts it, well, the letter just breeds Paul. His mind, his character, his way of thinking, his theological concerns. It all fits perfectly.
It feels authentic.
Completely. There's no obvious motive for someone to forge this kind of letter. It reads like a genuine personal message flowing out of his real situation. It sounds like Paul.
And what a situation it was. Let's consider his life leading up to writing Philippians. It wasn't easy.
Understatement of the year. Ever since that radical conversion on the road to Damascus, maybe 30 years earlier.
Which completely turned his life upside down, from persecutor to apostle.
Right. From that moment on, his life was just marked by constant, fierce opposition. From, well, pretty much everyone who didn't accept his message.
Gentiles, his own Jewish kinsmen.
Relentless. Think about the list. He had to flee Damascus almost immediately.
Yeah.
Remember the basket over the wall?
Yeah, hardly a glorious exit.
Then forced out of Iconium, Thessalonica, Berea. Just run out of town again and again.
And not just run out, physically attacked.
Oh, absolutely. Stoned and left for dead outside Lystra, beaten with rods and jailed in Philippi itself.
Which is ironic, given he's writing to Philippi from another jail cell.
Exactly. Then there was the mockery in Athens, being dragged before Roman officials like Gallio in Corinth. Riots stirred up against him in Ephesus.
Where he ministered for 3 years, but it was hardly peaceful.
No. Jewish plots to murder him were a recurring theme. His travel plans constantly disrupted. And remember, the Holy Spirit kept warning him that bonds and afflictions awaited him in every city.
That's quite a life calling.
It is. Constant pressure, constant danger, a cycle of suffering, and frankly, miraculous survival. But never despair.
And this suffering didn't stop. It led right up to him writing this letter.
No, it culminated, in a way. Back in Jerusalem, he's accused of defiling the temple. A huge mob beats him savagely.
Only safe because Roman soldiers arrested him, basically for his own protection initially.
Right. Then his case just gets stuck. 2 years under house arrest in Caesarea, bouncing between governors Felix and Festus.
Politics and procrastination.
Pretty much. He refuses to bribe Felix, refuses to go back to Jerusalem, where he knows he'll be ambushed. So eventually he plays his trump card.
His Roman citizenship.
Correct. He appeals to Caesar, which means his case gets transferred to Rome.
But even getting to Rome was an ordeal.
Oh, yeah. The shipwreck, violent storm, stranded on Malta.
Yeah.
Just another near-death experience added to the list.
So when he's writing Philippians, he's finally in Rome, but still under arrest.
Yes. For about 2 years by this point, making it roughly 4 years total in Roman custody since Jerusalem. He's waiting for the Emperor Nero, of all people, to hear his appeal and deliver a final verdict.
And that verdict could be freedom.
Or execution. Martyrdom was a very real possibility hanging over him every single day.
And this is the context for a letter overflowing with joy.
This is the context. Dire circumstances, uncertain future, facing a potentially lethal judgment. And yet, the letter radiates joy.
It's just such a powerful example of that settled conviction you talked about.
It really is. Trusting God's sovereign hand, even in the darkest, most threatening moments. It's not denying the hardship. It's finding joy in the Lord despite the hardship. It's a lived theology.
Okay, so we understand Paul's situation. What about the recipients, the people in Philippi?
Right. Understanding Philippi itself adds another layer. This wasn't just some backwater town. It was a major city in eastern Macedonia, modern-day northeastern Greece.
Strategically important.
Very. Sat on a fertile plain near the coast, controlled a key land route between Europe and Asia Minor, plus the main Roman road, the Via Egnatia, went right through it.
Like a major highway today.
Exactly. Huge for trade, military movement, communication.
Yeah.
And there were gold mines nearby, too, which added to its wealth and standing.
And it had a significant history even before Paul got there.
It did. Originally a small place called Crenides, meaning little fountains.
Yeah.
But then Philip II of Macedon.
Alexander the Great's father.
That's the one. He took it over around 356 BC, fortified it, saw its potential, especially these gold mines, and renamed it after himself.
Philippi. But the key event for its Roman identity came later.
Much later, 42 BC. The Battle of Philippi. Hugely significant event in Roman history.
This was Antony and Octavian against Brutus and Cassius, the guys who assassinated Julius Caesar.
Correct. Antony and Octavian won decisively.
Yeah.
And that battle essentially marked the death knell of the Roman Republic and the birth of the Roman Empire, with Octavian later becoming Emperor Augustus.
And Philippi was right at the center of it.
Right. So as a reward, and to settle their troops, Antony and Octavian established Philippi as a colonia, a Roman colony.
And that was a big deal.
A very big deal. It wasn't just an honorary title. It meant Philippi had the legal status of a city in Italy itself.
Wow. So rights and privileges.
Absolutely. Citizens of Philippi were Roman citizens.
Mm.
That meant exemptions from certain taxes, protection under Roman law, and crucially, they weren't under the direct rule of the provincial governor. More local autonomy.
They must have been proud of that status.
Immensely. The sources say they consciously imitated Rome architecture, dress styles. Their coins had Latin inscriptions. Latin was the official language, even though Greek was common locally. They saw themselves as a little piece of Rome in Greece.
That Roman identity probably shaped how they saw the world and maybe even how they reacted to Paul's message later.
Very likely. Loyalty to Rome was probably quite strong. Now, into this setting comes Paul, and he plants the very first church in Europe, right here in Philippi.
Not just a random stop.
No. Divinely directed. Acts 16 tells us Paul had a vision, a man from Macedonia pleading, "Come over to Macedonia and help us."
And Paul took that as God's call.
Immediately. Acts says we sought to go, and that we is significant. It tells us Luke, the author of Acts, was actually with Paul on this trip.
So we get an eyewitness account of the church starting.
We do. And the beginnings were quite dramatic, weren't they? Centered around two very different converts. Right, Lydia? A businesswoman, seller of expensive purple cloth. A Gentile, but a worshiper of God, likely a proselyte or God-fearer connected to Judaism. She's the first convert in Europe, and her home becomes the church's first meeting place.
And the other one?
The Philippian jailer. Converted after Paul and Silas are miraculously freed from prison during an earthquake. A Roman official, likely, converted along with his whole household.
So a mix of people right from the start.
A mix, yes. Some Jewish background, like Lydia perhaps, but mostly Gentiles. The sources note the lack of a formal synagogue there. If there had been 10 Jewish men, they could have had one.
So Paul met Lydia and the other women praying by the river outside the city.
Exactly. Suggesting a largely Gentile population making up this new church.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing for this new church either.
Far from it. Like Paul, they faced their own challenges. The sources mentioned they were desperately poor, economically struggling.
Yet remarkably generous to Paul.
Incredibly so. They supported him financially when no other church did, sending aid multiple times. It speaks volumes about their affection for him and their grasp of gospel partnership.
They also faced persecution.
Yes, living out their faith in Christ likely put them at odds with the prevailing Roman culture and emperor worship in Philippi. That would have brought opposition.
And internal problems, too.
Definitely. False teachers were trying to infiltrate, pushing legalism or other distortions of the gospel. That was a constant battle for Paul everywhere.
And then there was this specific conflict mentioned in the letter.
Right, the dispute between two women, Euodia and Syntyche. Paul pleads with them directly to agree in the Lord.
They must have been prominent figures in the church for Paul to name them like that.
Seems likely. Their disagreement was clearly causing ripples, threatening the church's unity. So you have poverty, persecution, false teaching, and internal conflict.
A lot for a young church to handle.
It was. But through it all, their bond with Paul remained incredibly strong. That gift they sent him while he was in prison in Rome, delivered by Epaphroditus, that's the immediate trigger for this letter.
And their reputation for generosity apparently lasted for decades.
It did. Church history notes that Ignatius, on his way to martyrdom about 50 years later, also received help from the Philippian church, a legacy of faithfulness and generosity.
Okay, so we have Paul, the author, in dire straits in Rome. We have the recipients, the Philippians, facing their own mix of external and internal pressures. Now, let's nail down the origin of the letter itself.
Right. Philippians is one of the 4 prison epistles, along with Ephesians, Colossians, and Philemon.
Meaning Paul wrote them while in prison, but where?
The traditional view, held for centuries, is Rome. Specifically, during his first Roman imprisonment, probably near the end of it, around AD 61.
And there's good evidence for Rome.
Very strong evidence within the letter. Paul mentions the Praetorian Guard, Philippians 1.13.
The emperor's elite soldiers.
Exactly. And he sends greetings from those of Caesar's household, Philippians 4.22.
Imperial staff, servants, maybe even family members who had become believers.
Precisely. Both those references point most naturally to Rome, the imperial capital. While Praetorium could mean a governor's palace elsewhere, the context in 1.13, quote, "My imprisonment in Christ has become known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and to everyone else," suggests the large imperial guard force in Rome, not just a local governor's detail.
Okay, that makes sense. What else points to Rome?
The conditions of his imprisonment described in Philippians being guarded, but allowed visitors able to preach.
Basically, house arrest.
Yes, that matches perfectly with Luke's description of Paul's situation in Rome at the end of Acts.
Doesn't fit a harsh dungeon scenario.
Not at all.
Yeah.
Also, Paul speaks about the gospel spreading widely and many believers being emboldened because of his imprisonment. That implies a large existing Christian community in the city where he was held.
Which fits Rome better than, say, Caesarea.
Much better. Rome would have had a substantial church by this time. Caesarea's was likely smaller.
But maybe the strongest argument for Rome relates to Paul's legal situation.
I think so. He talks about his case reaching a potential conclusion. He expects a verdict soon, either release or execution. Philippians 1.20:26.
A final decision.
Yes, a final decision with no possibility of further appeal. That kind of ultimate verdict could only come from the highest authority, the emperor in Rome.
Because if he were in Caesarea or Ephesus?
As a Roman citizen, he could, and did from Caesarea, appeal to Caesar. So a verdict in those provincial capitals wouldn't have been final. Rome was the end of the legal line.
So the alternatives proposed by some scholars, like Caesarea or Ephesus, they have problems.
They face significant hurdles
Mhm.
for Caesarea.
Hmm.
Why doesn't Paul mention Philip the evangelist who lived there and hosted him? Seems odd for a personal letter.
Good point.
And Paul's confident expectation of release in Philippians doesn't really fit the 2 years he was stuck in Caesarea, where his only options seemed to be bribery or going back to Jerusalem, neither which he'd do.
Okay, what about Ephesus?
The biggest issue for Ephesus is that Acts gives no record of Paul ever being imprisoned there. Luke details his 3 years there quite extensively in Acts 19.
And Paul himself implies a continuous ministry there when talking to the Ephesian elders later.
Exactly. Night and day for 3 years I did not cease to admonish each one with tears. Doesn't sound like he was locked up for a significant time. Plus, omissions, again, no mention of the collection for Jerusalem he was organizing then. Key companions aren't mentioned.
And the state of the church?
Ephesus seemed relatively united then, whereas Philippians hints at divisions and rivalries affecting how some preached Christ. Also, why would the Philippians need to send aid to Paul in Ephesus, a major city where he surely had support?
What about the argument about travel time? Some said the back and forth implied between Philippi and Paul's location, Epaphroditus coming, Timothy potentially going, Epaphroditus returning, was too long for Rome.
Yeah, that's been raised. But calculations show it's perfectly feasible. Sea travel was relatively efficient. The whole sequence could realistically fit within, say, 4 to 6 months. It's not a strong objection.
So, weighing the evidence.
Rome just fits the data best. The references to the Praetorian Guard and Caesar's household, the conditions of imprisonment matching Acts, the large church implied, and especially the finality of the expected verdict. It all points consistently to Rome, around AD 61. The traditional view holds up well.
Okay, so we've established the author, the recipients, the likely location and date. Let's talk about why Paul wrote this letter. What were his main purposes?
Well, there were several clear reasons, blending the practical and the pastoral. First, as we mentioned, a primary goal was simply to thank the Philippians for their generous financial gift.
The one Epaphroditus delivered.
Exactly. It was a practical expression of their love and partnership, and Paul wanted to acknowledge it warmly and formally. Second, he needed to explain why he was sending Epaphroditus back home. Epaphroditus had gotten terribly sick in Rome, almost died while serving Paul.
The Philippians would have been worried.
For sure. So Paul wanted to reassure them he was recovered and commend him for his faithful service, kind of smoothing his return. Third, Paul wanted to update them on his own situation.
How things were going in prison.
Right. And remarkably, he frames it positively, explaining how his imprisonment was actually advancing the gospel, even reaching the imperial guard. He wanted them to know God was still working.
So personal updates and thanks, but there were deeper pastoral concerns too.
Oh, definitely. He needed to warn them about false teachers. There were threats from likely Judaizers, those insisting on Jewish law for salvation, and perhaps others. Paul is fierce in countering them in chapter 3.
Protecting the core message of grace.
Absolutely. And then, as we noted, addressing that internal disunity, calling Euodia and Syntyche into reconciliation, urging the whole church toward humility and unity, modeled on Christ himself in chapter 2.
So it's a mix of gratitude, news, warnings, and exhortations.
Yes, and what's striking is how this letter, just soaked in joy despite Paul's chains, gives them guidance within their own struggles, poverty, persecution, internal friction.
He's not offering easy answers, is he?
No, he's showing them how to find joy, peace, contentment in the midst of every circumstance, by focusing on Christ and trusting God's sovereign plan. It's profoundly practical theology for suffering saints.
And Paul himself is Exhibit A.
Completely. Chained to a soldier, yet preaching freely. Facing a potential death sentence, yet expressing confidence and joy. It's a demonstration of the very message he's proclaiming. His life authenticated his words.
His trust wasn't in the outcome, but in God, regardless of the outcome.
That's the heart of it. That deep-seated resolve comes from knowing who is ultimately in control.
So, bringing this all together, this deep dive into Philippians, it really hammers home that biblical joy isn't about having an easy life.
Not at all. It's not the absence of hardship. It's that settled conviction, that firm belief that God is sovereignly directing all things for his good purposes.
And that kind of joy, rooted in God's character and control, is available to believers today.
Yes, regardless of what your external circumstances look like, because it's anchored in something unchanging.
Paul's life, his letter, they really do offer a roadmap for living with contentment, with peace, even when things are incredibly difficult.
He lived it out. From a Roman prison cell, facing possible death, he models a joy that transcends circumstance because it's found in the Lord.
Thinking about Paul's experience, or maybe the Philippians' own struggles, what really stands out to you from all this? What helps you grasp this specific message of God-centered joy?
That's a great question for reflection. And maybe consider this too. Paul issues a command, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. What would it actually look like for you to obey that instruction today?
To actively choose joy, not based on feelings, but based on the conviction of God's sovereign control, even when life feels overwhelming or confusing.
Exactly. How could cultivating that kind of settled conviction, that deep trust in God's plan, begin to reshape your outlook, your reactions, your daily walk, especially through the hard times?
Something profound to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Philippians.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.
Until next time, we hope you'll consider this really liberating message about finding joy in God's sovereign hand. Podcast outro music begins and fades in.